and I have the honor to invite His Excellency Ravinatha Aryasinha, Chair of Delegation of Sri Lanka, who will be the last speaker in the debate. Excellency.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed an honor to participate in the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly representing Sri Lanka. I bring you greetings from His Excellency President Maithripala Sirisena, President of Sri Lanka, who regrets very much his inability to have attended this session. Permit me to warmly congratulate His Excellency Professor Tajin Mahamud Bande, President of the 74th session of the UNGA, on his election. Undoubtedly, his long-standing experience will guide the work of this August Assembly to a successful conclusion. Let me also thank the outgoing President, Her Excellency Ms. Maria Fernande Spinoza Graces, for successfully conducting the work of the last session. I also wish to extend Sri Lanka's appreciation to Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his sagacious leadership and untiring efforts to achieve the objectives of the United Nations. Mr. President, the theme of this year's general debate is both timely and significant, as we strive to build a world of peace and prosperity by eradicating extreme poverty, ensuring access to quality education, and striving to respond to climate change and promote inclusion. As we complete the first cycle of the reviews of the implementation of the 2030 Development Agenda, it is clear that we have made substantial progress in achieving the SDGs. Yet, the end of the road is a long way off, with increasingly devastating impacts of climate change threatening to reverse these gains and impede our path to development. Sri Lanka reiterates its strong commitment to the climate-related global initiatives. Sri Lanka endorses the clear message of the Climate Action Summit held last week at this very venue. We are on that, and note that we are on the brink of a climate emergency. It is imperative to strengthen our collective political will and accelerate global action in stalling its emergence. Inequality-driven push factors aggravated by climate change have a definite negative bearing on individuals and communities, forcing them to leave their usual habitats, resulting in mass-scale migration of people. Having adopted the Global Compact on Migration, a voluntary framework for governing migration in a manner that is safe, orderly, regular, and responsible, it is now time for us to ensure its full implementation. Climate change has also exacerbated the global phenomena of poverty, undermining human dignity and remaining as one of the greatest threats to the achievement of the goals of the 2030 Development Agenda. Sri Lanka remains committed to the international efforts on poverty eradication, which has been at the heart of our development strategy for several decades now. Quality education remains the key to social progress and economic empowerment. Sri Lanka greatly values quality education as a means of eradicating poverty and achieving progress. We have a long-standing policy of providing universal and free education at primary and secondary levels since 1945, many decades before the introduction of the MDGs or the SDGs. Today, Sri Lanka's literacy rate stands at 92%, one of the highest in the world. As we persevere in these efforts to reverse the negative trends, our ability to address global challenges have been compromised in recent times by the increasing threat to multilateralism. As the UN approaches its 75th anniversary next year, this is an excellent opportunity to assess its successes and failures, including its engagement with member states. Partnerships fostered between member states and the UN over 70 decades based on trust and equity must not be compromised and allowed to be hijacked by actors accountable to none with selective political agendas. With change in the landscape of global politics, particularly with the emergence of non-state actors as an organization composed of and driven by sovereign member states, it is vital that primacy and respect be given to decisions taken by member states regarding essentially domestic matters. In this context, our quest to strengthen the work of this very UN General Assembly through its revitalization process is extremely important to ensure that it remains relevant as the main deliberative and policy-making organ of the United Nations. Therefore, it is incumbent upon the UN policy implementers to refrain from being misled by entities with vested interests. The UN must also desist from making decisions without a valid consultative process, as its works has always been member state driven. Failure to do so will not only vilify this august body and negate the values that it represents, but will also break the trust of member states, jeopardizing the partnerships within the United Nations. Sri Lanka's commitment to disarmament remains steadfast. With the increasing challenges to global arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation regimes, Sri Lanka continues to recognize the pivotal role the Conference on Disarmament plays and urges the resumption of substantive negotiations under its mandate. Decision CD 2119, adopted in February 2018 under Sri Lanka's presidency of the CD, was a modest contribution towards bridging different viewpoints, focusing on the early resumption of negotiations. We see value in the continuation of this process. Additionally, in recent years, Sri Lanka acceded to a number of disarmament treaties, including the Ottawa Convention. Sri Lanka has also presided over the states parties' meetings on the Convention on certain conventional weapons and also that on cluster munitions. The 2020 NPT Review Conference will also provide an opportunity for member states to deliver on its commitments as the treaty marks the 50th anniversary of entry into force next year. Sri Lanka has been contributing to the UN peacekeeping efforts since 1960, serving in the Central African Republic, Congo, Cote d'Ivoire, Haiti, Lebanon, Liberia, Mali, South Sudan, Timor, and Western Sahara, demonstrating our commitment to global peace and security. We look forward to enhancing our contribution towards a more secure and peaceful world, and obstacles must not be placed on Sri Lanka's long-standing peacekeeping contribution to the United Nations. Given Sri Lanka's experience of the recent past in low and high-intensity conflicts with terrorist groups, few countries can qualitatively match the troops sent by Sri Lanka, who have extensive professional experience in all aspects of peacekeeping and providing humanitarian assistance. I take this opportunity to express gratitude to their contribution and wish to particularly salute three soldiers: Corporal M. Vijayasinghe, who made the ultimate sacrifice in Haiti in 2005, and Captain H.W.D. Javikrama and Corporal S.S. Vijaykumara in Mali only earlier this year. Sri Lanka is also concerned about the deteriorating situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, where the continuing expansion of settlements across the occupied West Bank is causing increased demolition of homes. While restating Sri Lanka's consistent and principled position that the Palestinian people have a legitimate and inalienable right to the natural resources in their territory and to statehood, we further recognize the legitimate and sensitive security concerns of both the Palestinian and Israeli people. In this context, Sri Lanka reiterates the importance of the early implementation of the UN General Assembly resolutions regarding the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to statehood and the attainment of the two-state solution on the basis of the 1967 borders. Mr. President, there can be no development without peace. Peace is a catalyst for stability, inclusivity, and socio-economic growth. For nearly 30 years, my country was one of the worst affected by separatist terrorism long before the fight against terrorism became an international buzz phrase. With the defeat of terrorism in Sri Lanka in 2009, for nearly a decade, we experienced an unprecedented peace dividend. However, on 21st April, Easter Sunday this year, this peace was shattered by a heinous attack in Sri Lanka, which took the lives of over 250 of our citizens and foreign nationals and injured many other hundreds. This was an act of radical extremist terrorists who were inspired by and claimed allegiance to ISIS. This challenged the pluralistic processes in Sri Lanka of normalization, reconciliation, and development arduously built since the end of the separatist conflict. Despite the attempts of these terrorists to destroy the country's social fabric, the resilience and trust between our communities and the law enforcement authorities ensured that citizens themselves warned of impending attacks and assisted in apprehending the culprits. This incident also reminded that no country is immune to the bane of radicalization, extremism, and terrorism. It has reaffirmed our resolve to fight these global menaces and urge all countries to work in collaboration to address the root causes. We thank particularly the UN Secretary General and our friends in the international community who unreservedly condemned the Easter Sunday attacks and supported the government of Sri Lanka in numerous ways. Mr. President, the events of Easter Sunday bombing also taught us that fighting terrorism must go hand in hand with protecting human rights. One cannot be compromised for the other. This very delicate balance has often been elusive, with states veering towards one extreme or the other, applying double standards to similar situations and often politicizing these issues. We as a nation have found ourselves up to the task of overcoming these challenges posed by the violent extremism of Easter Sunday. The citizenry was secured within a relatively short period of time and law and order restored. Our institutions asserted themselves, each in their role to ensure the people, communities, and societies as a whole were able to feel safe again. In fact, the post-Easter Sunday attack period has proved to be a litmus test on Sri Lanka's resolve to adhere to human rights standards while fighting terrorism, and also determine the strengths and shortcomings of the democratic institutions that have been strengthened in recent years. In this context, a ministerial committee headed by Foreign Minister Tilak Marapana has been established by the Cabinet to study and propose amendments to the draft counterterrorism legislation currently under consideration by Parliament. Conscious of our international obligations, Sri Lanka is also consulting partners in striving to bring about domestic enabling legislation that would make us compliant with more recent Security Council resolutions on combating terrorism, those relating to terrorist financing, border security, returning terrorist fighters, and on countering violent extremism. Efforts are also underway to curb the terrorist use and abuse of internet and social media platforms, including by evolving legislative measures and law enforcement mechanisms to counter radical ideologies leading to violent extremism. In this context, it is necessary to develop the critical thinking capacity of youth, strengthen community bonds, inculcate a sense of civic duty, and build community resilience to mitigate the effects and influences of extremist ideologies conducive to terrorism that may escape the eye of the law enforcement authorities. In this regard, the role of the community and its resilience against local drivers of extremism is essential in preventing violent extremism. The recovery over the past 5 months demanded that we be resolute in governance. If we are to truly overcome these challenges, we must move to incorporating a whole-of-society approach to that with the whole-of-government approach. Mr. President, finally, as Sri Lanka steps into the second decade since the end of its internal armed separatist conflict, we remain committed to promote and protect the human rights of our people through a comprehensive process that would deliver permanent peace to our country. Recent events have reaffirmed the independence of our judiciary, as well as the resilience of our democratic institutions, including the public service. These events also concretize our public trust in democracy and the rule of law. And despite numerous challenges, the country has progressed in its course towards reconciliation and durable peace. In this context, I'm happy to note that there has been significant progress in addressing the many facets arising from the conflict. The Office on Missing Persons and also on reparations are now fully operational. The Cabinet of Ministers is also discussing the establishment of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Sri Lanka has maintained a constructive and continuous engagement with the UN, including with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and human rights mechanisms, where since the standing invitation of 2015, Sri Lanka has received 10 special procedure mandate holders and working groups. Independent institutions have also played a critical role in this regard, and it is encouraging to note that the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka was re-accredited with the A status by the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions in May 2018. Mr. President, you would agree that these are not simple steps for any country to take, especially when it has suffered through 30 years of long conflict and the more recent blows to its economy and polity. Promoting a peaceful, just, and reconciled society is not only an objective in itself, but also a prerequisite for a sustainable and inclusive approach to development that leaves no one behind. Each country has its unique post-conflict situation. While we can learn from others' experiences in charting our own path to reconciliation, we are committed to find innovative and pragmatic solutions to protect the country's national interest and well-being of all Sri Lankans, guided by the provisions of our Constitution. In conclusion, Mr. President, I wish to reiterate Sri Lanka's commitment to a rule-based global order. We value the spirit of multilateralism and cooperation. Even though humanity faces numerous challenges, I'm confident that we are well within our capability to address these in a collective, constructive, and cooperative manner for the betterment of all and our future generations. I thank you.
I thank the Chair of Delegation of Sri Lanka for his statement.